industry nationwide has been trying to stop. We were able to get it delayed. Originally, I think it was what, in December, Susan, or earlier?
Yes, it was
And it
December.
got postponed to now March 1st. There are also continuing lawsuits that have been initiated by underwriters, one of our major underwriters, as well as other independent title agents that have contested this particular regulation. But at the moment, March 1st is around the corner, so we have to assume that we're going to be required to comply. And I say it's, in my opinion, unnecessary, because it almost seems like the assumption that even in these particular transactions that you're going to hear about, that somebody's actually going to show up with a bunch of cash or something. It's just not happening. To me, the process has already been handled by the banks, because everything is done either via cashier's check or wires. And so this is just another additional layer of reporting, and it's just, to me, unnecessary, but it is what it is. So anyway, we appreciate your attendance today to learn about it. And like I said, maybe in a couple of weeks, we'll say, hey, you know what, never mind. But in any event, we have to be ready, don't we? So I thank you all and I appreciate your professionalism in wanting to pursue and learn more about this particular possibility or probability. So I applaud you for that. And it only shows that you care about your business and about your clients, especially. I do want to point out that we have, I think, almost all of our branches, escrow departments here. So I'm going to start with Westlaco. If the Westlaco staff will stand up, led by Salema Ochoa. On the northern end of Hidalgo County, our Edinburgh branch, led by Patty Galindo. The western end, Mission, led by Abby Elena. And then from my town staff will stand, and we have Mary Barrientos signing us the escrow branch operations, and Marilyn Luna on the commercial closing staff. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Susan, that will kind of introduce the program. And again, thank you very much. And remember, Valley Title Company, we're open on Saturdays, so you can close.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Susan Garcia with Valley Land Title. I'm Director of Administration. I have a question for you. How many of you have been in this business for more than 30 years? Raise your hand, please. There you go. Thank you, Adrian. How many of you have been in the business for more than 15 years? We're getting a few more. How many of you have been in the business over 5 years? Even more. Most of us that are here today, we've been in real estate for quite some time, and we've seen major changes in the industry. Many of you probably don't remember, but on January 1st, 1998, home equity loans became legal in the state of Texas. I was closing at that time, and it was scary because there were so many rules and so many regulations handling those types of loans. And then eventually the dust settled on that. Then on October 3rd, 2015, CFPB came up with this great idea that we were no longer going to use the HUD-1, which many of us have been familiar with for years, and now it became the closing disclosure, the CD. That was a big change in our industry, but again, the dust settled. Now, a little more than 10 years later, here we are today with another big change on the horizon. And faced with the federal law, this is what we're facing, a federal law that requires certain real estate transactions be reported to let me see if I get this right, it's long, to the U.S. Treasury Department Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. We call it Fincen. And before I go on, I do want to preface that Fincen is going to be evolving because there are still a lot of questions out there, and there's still a lot of clarification needed on Fincen. Now, there are specific transactions that are going to be subject to Fincen, and they're defined within 3 parameters. And you'll find these definitions on your handouts. Is it a non-finance transaction? Does it involve residential real estate? And is the buyer an entity or a trust? What is most challenging here, though, is not what is in our control, not even your control. And that's where we're all going to have to come together and work and communicate, because it's going to depend on the buyer and sellers. If we discover that a transaction we're handling is going to be reportable, we're using a third-party vendor to handle that for us. Now, we will advise the parties that it's reportable and that they will need to work with that vendor to get the information. We have enclosed copies of the seller form and the buyer form. And if you take a look at those, you'll see that there's a lot of information required, especially on the buyer side. And it's going to be very important that they complete these forms with every blank completed that is applicable to them, so as not to cause any delays in closing or even to be able to close. Because if we don't have all that information, we cannot close. And that's the bottom line. That's what we're going to have to make known to buyers and sellers and really stress that. And the reason that we cannot close is because we have 30 days after it closes to report it to the federal government. Without all the necessary information, we cannot report. And if we don't do that in 30 days, then we, Valley Land, is subject to penalties. And we don't want to be paying penalties. Another thing that's going to be very important is if you're working with a buyer, and at some point they mentioned to you that they may be transferring the contract from their individual names to an entity that's in the process of being formed, or that a trust that's being set up for them, you need to get with your closer, let them know immediately, because we will have to take another look at the transaction and be able to determine, okay, now it's going to be a reportable transaction. So we'll have to start that process of gathering that information. We have with us today, though, through Zoom, 2 members of our Alliant National Title Insurance underwriting team, and they're going to explain Fincen further and be available to answer questions for you as well. Now, I want to introduce you to Elise Schweitzer. She is the Regulatory Compliance Officer for Alliant, and Valerie Grandin, who is Senior Vice President and Chief Underwriting Counsel. So ladies, you have the floor, or should I say you have the Zoom now. Take it over.
Thank you so much. And again, I do want to commend, first of all, the folks at Valley Land Title for putting this together. And secondly, to all of you in attendance. We're going to just move through understanding how you as real estate agents are going to help these transactions close more smoothly in light of this new Fincen rule. Let me first introduce, this is me. This is where you can find me if you have any questions following the program. And similarly, I want to introduce my colleague, Elise Schweitzer, who's been invaluable as our company has rolled out this complex new rule for our agents and for their customers like you all.
I have lived and breathed Fincen for 8 years or so.
Yeah, it actually started in 2016, guys. And so I've been living it since then as well. So we're going to just briefly let you know, we're going to talk about what exactly is Fincen. Why are they doing this? Why do we care? What is the residential real estate rule? That's the new rule becoming effective March the 1st. And what's going to be required of our title agents, of you as real estate professionals, and of your buyers and sellers. And most importantly, what I know everyone wants to know is, how will this impact my closing? Now, like, a bunch of lawyers, we always have to have the legalese. And, I am educating you guys on this topic. It is not legal advice for you. I'm sure your agencies have counsel. So certainly check with your brokers as well as with counsel if that's available to you. So it was mentioned early on that this rule was put off and delayed. It was also very much more stringent than the final version, thanks in large part to the American Land Title Association, because they really lobbied and educated Fincen on the business of title and closings so that it actually is a lot less difficult to close under this new rule than it might have been. So we're going to start with, what is the rule and how does it impact you? So what is Fincen? As you heard, it stands for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. This was created by Congress. It's part of the Treasury Department. And on the screen, you see its mission is to safeguard the U.S. financial system from illicit use, from money laundering, terrorism, and promote our national security through collection of this information. The Fincen was really started, if you know the history, back when, not too long after 9/11, where we saw financial support for those terrorists were filtering through U.S. banking institutions. So the U.S. jumped on that and really got a lot more stringent in monitoring that. Now, I do want to just focus on one thing that was said early on, so we're all on the same page. Banks do not verify wires. They do not verify who owned the account, if the money is coming from where they say it's coming from. They don't do that. Where a bank does know their customer is where you have a bank who has anti-money laundering obligations under the Bank Secrecy Act, and what you may have heard before, where they must know their customer. So if you apply for a loan with an institutional lender, you and I know you've got Social Security information, tax information, verifying employment, all of those things are done. So they know who their borrower is. That doesn't happen in a cash transaction, nor in private financing or hard money lender. So we're going to delve into all those distinctions. But first, what is this new rule that we're dealing with? Well, here it's, as you can imagine, like all federal government legislation, very lengthy, but in essence, what it says is it requires the report of details regarding a residential, non-financed, or cash transaction where there's a conveyance to an entity, a trust, an LLC, a partnership, or corporation. And that information has to be collected and reported to Fincen. This means when we talk about non-financed, that involves hard money loans. A hard money lender doesn't care who the borrower is. All they want to know is there equity in that property? If so, I'm going to loan them money. So they don't know who their borrowers are. Private lenders in seller financing, does a seller ask for extensive information? Maybe of financials, maybe bank account information, but if there's an entity borrowing from a seller or family members, they do not have the obligation to know their borrower and report any issues to Fincen under the Bank Secrecy Act. So that's why it is not just cash deals, but non-institutional lenders, essentially. Any of those deals are also reportable. So in a nutshell, why are they doing this rule? Well, it is to stop crime. And the predecessors to this rule have done just that effectively. Some of you may be in counties where we had geographic targeting orders, and those were basically the pilot program for the residential real estate rule, and they were effective. So what does that mean? When we have effective crime prevention, we want to expand it to stop all the crime that we can in our industry. Hence this rule, which now impacts every U.S. jurisdiction. So what is the purpose of the rule? Basically, it is to stop money laundering, which helps terrorists, drug lords, oligarchs, criminal conspirators. When you have entities or trusts as a purchaser, we don't have information in the land records as to who the beneficial owner of that entity is, who controls the money. The only way to collect that data is to ask for it as part of this transaction in a separate report. Fincen wants to know who the human beings are behind these entities so they can correlate other data and stop money laundering. You know, what they found with the GTOs in the pilot program was many of the real estate deals reported and the individuals' names identified were actually already the subject of FBI investigations for money laundering. So title industry helped them find these assets and hopefully recover some victims' money from their ill-gotten gains. So I think it's important to understand why we need this rule and why it bubbled up. And it's to stop money laundering in the US, but it's also our obligation as an international citizen. Because what happens 99 out of 100 times when money is diverted or laundered? It goes offshore. So the US law enforcement entities need the authority to collaborate and work with foreign law enforcement agencies to try and claw this money back for US citizens. So our kind of legislative structure was woefully behind that of our international partners. And so we needed to step up to meet their level of scrutiny. So for example, US is part of the Financial Action Task Force, which is a global money laundering and terrorist financing watchdog who helps one another identify assets in offshore banks and redirect them. Interpol, I'm sure you've heard of that organization. Well, they have cross-border investigations related to cyber crime and money laundering. We need to participate with them, so we need the legislative structure to be able to do that. And my earlier slide said, well, why are we doing this? Well, 86% of closed cases from the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force relied on Bank Secrecy Act data or this reporting information that we're collecting. That's a pretty significant way to stop drug trafficking. 27% of organized crime investigations involved money laundering through real estate purchases. We all know, guys, U.S. real estate is a tremendously secure asset, and criminals want to be in it just as much as any of us. And we talked again about the earlier GTO filings, and 7% of those involve subjects of ongoing FBI investigation. So we helped them identify where the money had gone into real estate, and then they were able to pull it back. Here's some examples. The Marshals Service, they went out and in 2024, $7.6 billion of assets were forfeited from criminal engagement where we found this data. 21 million in real estate, and we got 605 million distributed back to the victims of the crimes. So very, very critical. And you can see on this map, it's happening everywhere, from Minnesota to Arizona to Washington to Puerto Rico. And so, if we don't expand our reach, they just moved somewhere else to commit the crimes and hurt innocent victims. And again, here's it worked. They got real property back and seized it and sold it to recover money for the victims of the crime. Now, I think it's always good for you because, again, you may be in the field and need to explain to your customers and your clients why this is important. Well, here's a perfect example. We had a lawyer in New York who was basically a straw buyer for a Russian oligarch. He was just running the funds through his law firm bank account, and there were numbers of shell companies. And until they dug in and got behind it and saw who the real party in interest was, which was Victor Vesselberg, they couldn't access this criminal. So they actually found it was a Bahamian entity that was behind this, and this Russian oligarch was involved. Here we have this modest little home in the suburbs. Well, between 2009 and 2017, Mr. Colon and Ms. Martinez ran a drug operation in the basement. They had a grow operation. And again, through data collected about real estate when they were funding property purchases with cash or cashier's check, they were caught. And this, to me, is the worst example. We had a government official from Equatorial Guinea, Mr. Obiang, who was, the Minister of Agriculture. He had a government job making $100,000. And yet look at his home in Malibu, nice mansion. He had a Ferrari, loved Michael Jackson memorabilia. The home was full of it. Well, what they found was he had diverted millions of dollars from the government of Equatorial Guinea. And in fact, that money had been directed there to assist with COVID vaccinations for the country. So when they recovered the funds and found these real estate assets, they returned that money to his country and to the citizens that really needed that assistance. So again, law enforcement likes success stories, and they have a lot of them arising from the rule. So what information is required? Because I think this is important for you to talk to your customers and say, guys, this is required by the federal government. And please be as thorough in completing the information as possible. So we're going to need information from a lot of parties. Valley Land Title is going to report information on who they are because they are going to be the reporting person. So they actually have to report as well. Then on the buyer, if it's an entity or trust, we need information on the beneficial owners. And those are individuals who hold 25% or more of the ownership interest. So if you have a single member LLC buying property for investment, that individual is going to report. We need address, we might need social security number or a passport number. Now, this is new under the rule. The seller must also report information. Again, if your seller is an entity, we need to know who the human beings are behind that entity. We call that peeling back the onion to get to the human being. So again, we need information on that seller. Information on the property, name, address, legal description, purchase price, those type of things. And then also new under this rule is banking information for the buyer. Every single dollar that is transferred to Valley Title to purchase that property, we will need disclosures regarding the bank account they come from, the owner of the bank account, the number, the bank. This includes if your real estate office is holding an earnest money deposit, that bank account must also be reported. If a buyer's attorney is holding funds, we will need information from that attorney's bank account. So you can see from this data, it's not something that's going to happen morning of closing. It's going to be data that needs to be collected much sooner. And the good news here is that, again, our friends at the American Land Title Association developed buyer and seller data collection forms. These should be pretty uniform wherever you go to conduct your closings. Certainly you should be at Valley Land Title, and they will help you through this. But I shared that with the team at Valley Land, so you have an example. As soon as you find out that there's an entity as the purchaser on residential property, you're going to want to make sure the parties are working on these forms. I know Valley Land will make sure they have them, but you can reinforce how important it is to complete those sooner than later. So how is this going to impact your closing? Because that's what we all want to know here, correct? I know Valley Land is on top of this, and they're going to make sure that it's seamless. But again, your buyers and sellers are going to submit this information prior to closing. Our speaker earlier said they will not close till they have it in hand. So the sooner you get it there, the more likely your closing is to kind of proceed timely. I think no doubt Valley Land will, as soon as they see an entity as the purchaser, distribute those data collection forms to give their customers enough time to complete the information. Now,
Can I interject for one moment? Fincen also will not allow submission of an incomplete form. So the data that you get must be complete or it will not be submitted.
great point, Elise. So guys, I know I can imagine you're in the field with your customers and they say, this is ridiculous. Why do they want all this information? Well, aside from the fines the Valley Land Title talked about, there are also criminal sanctions for not complying. So it needs to be complete so that it can be submitted and no one's going to jail, which is really important here. Thanks, Elise. I appreciate that. And, once they fill out the form, your buyer and seller signs off and says, this is complete. I've given you all the information. And then that closing can proceed without delay. Then the folks at Valley Land Title will do exactly what they said, which is file the report with Fincen within 30 days. And then they retain that data collected in a secure setting for 5 years. They must retain it in the event that law enforcement comes to their office and demands to review it. So it's important you work with a solid title agent like Valley Land because they are going to be holding this data. And I know they have secure systems in place to protect your customers' privacy and financial data. So will there be changes to your contract or the closing documents as a result of this rule? Well, again, as soon as order entry, they're going to get these new reporting forms, data collection forms. As our earlier speaker said, even if they sign the contract individually, if they go, oh yeah, when we get close to closing, I'm going to put it in an LLC. You need to alert the title agent at that moment so they can get ready. Now, let me give you another little scenario. Some people may say, oh, well, you know what? I'll just buy it in my name, and then I'll go back later and have it transferred to my LLC. Regardless of when that transfer happens, so if they go back later and come to Valley Land and say, hey, Valley Land, just do a quitclaim deed, put it into my LLC now because this is my investment property. Valley Land will still need to report at that time. Even on $0 transactions, there's going to be this reporting requirement. So you really can't, you're just postponing the inevitable. You're not going to avoid this reporting process. Commitments coming out of our company as underwriter will not have any requirement about this. That information will come from the title agent because the title agent has primary liability to report this information, not my company as their underwriter. So if we prepare the commitment, we won't have that on there. Now, what about forms? So I'm a Florida lawyer, and in Florida, we have a preferred contract developed by the Florida Bar and the Florida Real Estate Commission. And they have added a clause to that contract that requires the parties, here's the example, requires the parties to comply with Fincen and allocates who is going to pay the costs associated with the reporting. I know that the Texas Real Estate Commission is working on that as well. I have not seen the final language yet, so please talk to your brokers and make sure you're working with the most current contract form, which has this requirement for Fincen. So, you're very tiny on my screen, but can I see a show of hands of any of you who dealt with the Fincen geographic targeting orders in the past? Certain Texas counties were impacted. Did any of you experience working under the GTOs in the past? Any hands? Oh, I see a few. Okay. So I think I would say the residential real estate rule is kind of GTO on steroids. And I'll show you in this comparison. So what type of property had to be reported under the GTO? Well, it's 1 to 4 family dwellings. That means condos, co-ops. But under the new rule, it could also be someone purchasing a vacant lot intending to build a home on it. If that is their intention, that transaction is reportable. Similarly, in some of our urban areas, you have maybe a mixed use building where we've got commercial uses, restaurants, dry cleaner on the first floor, and then a few condos upstairs. Well, those condos, when sold, they need to be reported, even though they sit on commercial property. Under the GTO, we were only dealing with 9 states and about 45 counties within those states. Under the new rule, it is all U.S. states and territories, every county, Puerto Rico, District of Columbia, and all Indian lands. So anything under an American flag is subject to this new rule. We're all going to feel the pain together now. Under the old rule, we had threshold dollar amounts, transactions, under 300,000 in all but Baltimore didn't have to report. Well, now it is a $0 transfer. No, it doesn't matter how much it's being transferred for, you must report it if it meets the other criteria. Under the old rule, we only looked at corporations, LLCs, and partnerships. So now we have added trusts. But the good news is there are a lot of exemptions for kind of the typical family setting up a revocable trust for maybe estate planning reasons. Those are likely exempt. So check with Valley Land Title as soon as you get that contract, and they will be able to help you discover if it is or isn't a reportable transaction. Under the old GTO, it was only the buyer that had to report information, and now it's the seller. Why is that? Well, money laundering sometimes goes through a lot of parties before it gets whitewashed. And they found that some of the sellers were in collusion with the money launderers. So that's why they're asking for that data. It's a lot less information for our seller, but still they want to know who is this seller, especially if it's an entity, who is the real person in interest behind there. One thing has not changed. There are criminal and civil penalties for failing to comply. I love the folks at Valley Land Title. I do not want them behind bars anytime soon. So that's why we've all got to comply. And then under the GTO, typically there was not a charge. Now the rule provides that the title agent may charge in order to comply with the reporting obligations. And that will be part of the settlement statement. Now, I know that Texas has specific escrow rules. Elise, do you want to speak to those at all?
I attended the TLTA webinar last week, I believe, and they talked about when you have a third-party vendor who basically specializes in gathering the data, preparing these files, file reports, and submitting them, you can put their fee on the settlement statement. If it's going to be the title agent itself that does the work, then the impression I got is that that's separate and that does not go on the settlement statement. That's a fee that is invoiced separately and will go through the operating account. And
Yeah. So
we'll
there
probably be
will
sending
be,
out, yeah, I believe that we're going to be sending out an alert or a title tip or something for our agents to give them more detail on that.
yeah. So I think it's helpful for you as real estate professionals to know, why are people charging? Well, here is data collected by Fincen when they were preparing the rule about what it costs to do this work. As you can see, it's a couple $100. It's staff time. Think about it. You know, in dealing with your customers, you send them a form to fill out. You might have to call them 2 or 3 times to get it complete. Then you've got to review it, make sure everything's there, go back to them. So it's a lot of staff time. There are also some vendors who are doing the work. I don't know, maybe Valley Land can speak to this after Elise and I finish, but there are some really good vendors who are doing that for title agents, and they are reaching out all through very secure channels to collect the data. So
I think
of course,
I heard
there's a charge.
That Valley Land intended to use a third-party vendor. Is that correct? Can somebody speak up for that?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And so thank you for that. And so those people, like that's their specialty, and they're going to take really good care of your clients. They're going to send them letters that explain, why they're doing what they're doing, who they were hired by, and they have very secure methods of transferring the data. And if the client wants them to store the data for them, they have a secure way of storing the data too. So everything is kept private and you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. So that fee of that vendor would be passed through to whoever is under the contract obligated to pay that. Typically, it is the buyer, because the buyer is the one that says, I'm going to buy in an entity and triggering this reporting. So that's what we've seen in a lot of scenarios. So again, just why do we have to comply? If somebody asks you this, there you go. They're going to pay a lot of money, or they're going to jail and paying a lot of money. So, this is really, it's not someone trying to pry into personal information. I know sometimes people put things in an LLC to protect their privacy, but this is the federal law requiring these disclosures. So I think what I want to finish with, and then Elise and I know the team at Valley Land are happy to take more questions, is, what can you as real estate professionals do to make certain that this transaction proceeds smoothly? And, first question, and I know we've raised this in the past, make sure you talk to the buyer. Is there any chance you're going to flip this contract to an LLC or corporation before closing, or into your trust for estate planning? That all needs to be shared with the title agent as soon as possible. Yeah. Our title agent, I know, is going to send them this information as soon as possible. Encourage them to start collecting the data and putting it in information. Again, if you hear even an inkling over a cup of coffee that they might put it in, let the title agent know so there's no delay. And then I think finally, I want to give you some information So if your buyer and seller are hesitant to provide this data, so you can allay their fears, and so they comply and we all get to closing. The point of this is to stop money laundering. It is required by the federal government. We talked about the penalties for noncompliance. The information is not going to be going back and forth in emails. It'll only come through secure platforms that cannot be hacked or stolen. So that's important to tell them, because I know they may have some reticence about this. And then lastly, if there's any questions whatsoever, you've got the folks at Valley Land, which clearly they're professionals and very knowledgeable on the topic. Have them immediately reach out so that they can allay their concerns. Because we want everyone to be comfortable in this. We know that early on, there's going to be a lot more questions. And so we're all willing to help and get folks comfortable with this new operational change.
And I think that as
yeah.
the real estate sales agent, the first line is going to be you, and getting your clients comfortable with this new structure is essential. They're going to be questioning it. There will be discomfort. And so having you, explain to them, and then hearing it again and again and again as it proceeds through, the process, will acclimate them, and they'll feel that this is a more legitimate situation than they would have otherwise felt.
Well, any questions, guys? Elise and I are here for you.
We do have a question.
Okay.
We do have a question. Can you hear us?
Sort of, but
a little.
Yeah. Just so whoever's asking is on the mic, that would be helpful.
Good morning. Will this impact 1031 transactions?
Yes, but what it will impact is the 1031 entity is exempt from reporting. So let's say we have a sale from John Smith, it goes into the 1031 intermediary. That part of the transaction is not reportable. But when it goes from the 1031 into an entity or a trust and meets the other criteria, that part of the transaction will be reportable. That ultimate buyer will need to report. Good question.
Does not make sense. If 1031 has sold property, you're gonna buy something else under the same entity.
So the way a 1031 works is it goes from the selling entity into the 1031, and then those proceeds are used to purchase another property by that same entity. So the entity, the ultimate purchaser, is not exempt. 1031s are exempt because they have other reporting obligations under the federal law. So that ultimate buyer needs to report. So there's a lot of entity exemptions that we didn't talk about, which just generally I'll share. They kind of make sense in that they are, for example, a publicly traded company as a buyer, that transaction's exempt. They are already reporting to the federal government under SEC regulations, everything about the company, the officers, the individuals, who controls it. So those are exempt, so they're not reporting twice. Similarly, if you have transactions which are at the direction of a court, either sometimes in a bankruptcy transaction or in a dissolution of marriage, those court supervised transactions may be exempt, because the idea is that that court has scrutinized who these parties are, and so we don't require them to disclose that info twice. Mm-hmm. But so in a 1031, your last your last entity buyer, we have to know who is purchasing
Mhm.
behind that entity.
So I was just going to say that in Florida, we only have judicial foreclosure, but I know that in Texas, you have non-judicial and judicial foreclosures. So with a judicial foreclosure, there would be a court order involved, and that would be an exempt situation. But if it's a non-judicial, then there would be no court order and no exemption.
Good question. Yep.
We have another question.
Hi, hello. I have a question only because I know I'm going to get asked this question by my clients. This is happening for financial crimes, correct? Money laundering.
Yes.
My question is on the beneficial owner report, is it going to be used at all for federal liens, federal judgments, IRS debt? Or is it strictly just for financial crimes?
We don't know who they're going to share it with.
Yeah,
They could share
they
it
are
with
sharing it
anybody.
with law enforcement that I know would have access to it, but I do not know the full scope of how they're going to share it.
Clients move their different real estate into different LLCs or trusts to protect it from federal judgment or from the collections. So I'm wondering if they're going to use this for that as well, or is it strictly just for financial crimes?
I can't tell you the scope of that, but respectfully, if someone's transferring assets to avoid a judgment attaching, there might be other issues there. Mostly what
with a financial advisor, sometimes things are set up different ways. So it's not
right, it's to protect from liability. Yeah, that's appropriate. You put it like somebody that owns a residential property they lease, they would want to put it in an LLC so that their personal assets are protected. That's absolutely a valid reason, but nevertheless, they want to collect that data. And unfortunately, with our current administration, I cannot advise the full scope of how that information could be shared. But if it's a valid transfer like that for protection from potential liability, not avoiding an existing judgment, then,
because that's the reason we have LLCs and different entities.
Exactly. And that shouldn't be an issue there, as long as those individuals are not engaged in money laundering, should not be. I mean, you absolutely have the right to protect your assets from potential liability. So, I can't unequivocally tell you where it's going to be shared or not.
Yeah,
but it doesn't change the legality of
Right.
the character of what you're doing.
Right.
Right. I was going to say, I don't want to insinuate to clients, well, you're asking that question because you're probably already doing something, iffy, which in a lot of cases, not everybody here pays federal taxes, but we don't love to, but there's ways not to evade, but to lower your liability. So that's the same way they put, they have different properties, different assets. So if they ask me.
Yeah, I think they would need to talk to their own counsel for guidance on that, understanding that they will need to report this limited data regarding the property and where the money is coming to purchase the property for that particular transaction.
Thank you so much.
Sure, good question.
Any other questions? You got a question? Sure, here you go. We got one more question.
Sure.
Hi, thank you for everything. This has been very helpful. I'm just wondering for people, because probably everybody in this room is going to be asked by their clients at some point to help them fill out these forms. Is there any recommendations you have as to like some sort of a disclaimer or some, like if somebody's helping somebody else fill it out, or we're relying on the information you're giving us, and because like the form says you have to identify if somebody else is helping you complete the form.
Yeah, so I think what's very important is the last certification on those data collection forms that the individual completing it should sign. And that is, everything I have completely filled this out is true and correct and accurate. And no one has, the title agent doesn't now have to go behind that and verify it. What I would say is, I'm sorry, I don't know who's asking if that's an escrow agent or a real estate agent, but I would talk to your manager or your broker and see how they want you to handle it. They may have a one-page disclaimer that you say, hey, I'll help you fill it out. But all they're going to do is say, do you have this information? You need to fill this in. It's going to be very much just reading along and assisting, because you do want it to be complete. I think Fincen did an analysis, and they think for virtually every transaction, about they're going to need probably 60% of the information they're asking for. So not every single block on the form might be necessary, but if it says what is the bank account where the earnest money deposit is from, you got to fill it out. You got to get that information and complete it. That's just going to slow down the closing if they don't. But I would say talk to your managers on how they want you to handle this. Some may say, hey, stay out of it altogether. Others may say, help them as much as possible. We may have elderly parties. You're going to need to help them with that. But the bottom line is they are personally going to sign that it is true and correct and complete. And that's the most important element on that data collection form.
And when you use a third-party vendor, they may already have a structure where they provide some kind of assistance. They may have already thought of that, of questions that clients are going to have. So there might be availability for help right there.
Yeah. The third-party vendors are really good. I'm so happy to hear Valley Land has worked on that, because some of the companies, there were similar reporting obligations under another statute. And, one of the vendors we recommend, for example, has done hundreds of thousands of those filings. So they know what the questions are. They know how to help guide people through it effectively. So I think you're going to be facing a really positive experience for your customer.
Agreed.
Don't be shy.
Super.
Okay.
Well, on the screen are our emails if you have any other questions. But again, I would say, clearly the folks at Valley Land Title are prepared. So that should be your first stop. They'll reach out to us if you really ask a stumper of a question. But thank you so much for having us today, and good luck as we embark on Fincen. We're all in this together. So, we're all going to support each other through it. And bottom line, it will protect all of us from money laundering, terrorism, and these other crimes. So let's focus on the positive.
Yeah, it's going to be a learning curve, but we'll adjust like we have many times before, and it'll be fine.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nanette. I just wanted to say thank you again for attending. I also wanted to let you know that if you're interested in the point, email me and I will send it to you. Email is palomo@valleylandtitleco.com. Okay? So, or call me 956-212-0336, and I'll be happy to send it on. And if you have any other questions, you can reach out to Valerie or Elsie or Susan or any of our escrow people. They'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Thanks again. Really appreciate y'all attending. There's plenty of tacos if y'all want to take some for the road. Have a great day.